I'm not a huge fan of using real personality assessments on fictional characters because it usually devolves into some dumb debate about what Myers-Briggs type Spider-Man is or which Enneagram type Captain America is. He's a 6. But when you find yourself in New Zealand, and more importantly, in the Shire, you gotta talk about the Lord of the Rings, right? So let's get into it. Okay, quick disclaimer before we dive in. My main goal on this channel is to help people better understand the Enneagram. So in this series, I wanted to use every Enneagram type at least once, and I'll be utilizing the wings so that I have 18 options to match up with characters from Lord of the Rings. I'm far less concerned about finding these fictional characters' perfect Enneagram type match, but if you want to have a friendly conversation in the comment section about what type you really think each character is, then be my guest. But if you hit me with some of that snarky nerd aggression because I didn't match your favorite character to your specific Enneagram type, you know what I'm gonna do?
Bend over and take it up the tailpipe!
Hey, look, we're splicing in movie clips already. But seriously, don't take this seriously. All right, since our journey begins in Hobbiton, let's start with the Enneagram types of our furry-footed friends first. Oof, say that 5 times fast. All right, let's talk about the main protagonist of our story, Mr. Frodo Baggins. I believe Frodo highlights many of the best characteristics of the Type 1 reformer. Frodo is very concerned with doing what's right, even if it costs him everything.
I will take the ring to Mordor.
And like a typical one, Frodo feels the weight of the world upon his shoulders. Many of the other hobbits are quite sneaky, playful, or downright childish, but Frodo is more serious and discerning.
Frodo suspects something.
Of course he does. He's a Baggins, not some block-headed brace girdle from Hardbottle.
Furthermore, Frodo has a strong moral compass and is able to resist the evil of the ring he carries.
And yet to have come so far, still bearing the ring, the Hobbit has shown extraordinary resilience to its evil.
Frodo even shows a bit of that harsh, critical nature of the Type 1 in his initial perception of Gollum.
It's a pity Bilbo didn't kill him when he had the chance.
Though this does change throughout the course of the films. Lastly, I threw a 2-wing on Frodo just because of his willingness to serve the Fellowship through direct action rather than his philosophic morals, which would be more like a 1-wing 9.
Then I know what I must do.
It also creates a nice overlap with his best friend and some would say true hero of the story, Samwise Gamgee, who's next on our list as a 2-wing 1. When it comes to embodying the traits of the Type 2 helper with a 1-wing, Samwise Gamgee is an excellent match. Sam is noble, committed, and willing to serve the ones he loves with his entire being. Sam also has the most epic Enneagram 2 quote of all time.
I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you!
When 2s feel threatened or stressed, they often take on the bold, brash, aggressive traits of the Type 8 challenger, which Sam does constantly throughout each of the 3 films.
Let it go, or I'll have you, Lord Saints!
2s are also in the positive outlook group of the harmonic triad, and Sam radiates positivity as he constantly seeks to encourage Frodo even in the bleakest of moments.
But in the end, it's only a passing thing. This shadow, even darkness must pass. A new day will come. And when the sun shines, it'll shine out the clearer.
I'm not crying, you're crying. I know many folks label Sam as a Type 6 loyalist because he's loyal to Frodo, and 2-wing 1s often mistype themselves as Type 6 loyalists, especially guys who are a little afraid to be a helper, but it's things like this unrelenting spirit of positivity that doesn't really embody the 6's tendency towards a more realistic, if not often pessimistic worldview. Plus, he always brings the food. And if any of you have a Type 2 mom, then you know that their snack game is unparalleled. All right, on to the next. I gotta say, it was pretty tough to split up Merry and Pippin because they're both so similar and they're almost always together doing the same thing. But once I decided on which type to assign Pip, it was pretty easy to land on where Merry should go, which is the Enneagram 6, Wing 7, which is also known as the Buddy. Merry is almost as concerned as Pip is with having a good time, but he's just a little bit more mature about his recreational tendencies. We see Merry exhibit this more grounded perspective in his scrutiny and criticism of Pip's careless behavior.
Why did you look? Why do you always have to look? You smoke too much, Pip.
Sixes are typically more responsible and restrained than sevens, which is why they have a tendency to nip at those closest to them.
Pippin!
Lastly, the main virtue of healthy sixes is their courage and willingness to fight for what they believe in. And we see this multiple times as Merry tries to convince the Ents to go to war.
You must do something.
You are young and brave, Master Merry.
And in Merry's desire to join the army himself in Return of the King.
To battle.
Alright, since I already referenced Pippin a bit, let's move on to his Enneagram type. While the hobbits seem to have a culture defined by sevenness, no one exemplifies the most cliché aspects of the Type 7 enthusiast quite like Peregrine Took. Pippin is the embodiment of the Seven's key struggle with gluttony.
Mushrooms!
It comes in pints?
I'm getting one.
What about breakfast?
You've already had it.
We've had one, yes. What about second breakfast? What about elevensies? Luncheon, afternoon tea, dinner, supper.
Pippin is upbeat, fun-loving, ever curious, and mischievous in a harmless way. Well, mostly harmless. While sevens are all about a good time, the six wing adds a layer of relational loyalty to their sense of adventure, which we see in his deep attachment to Merry.
We'll see each other soon, won't we?
All right, time to demonstrate the difference between seven wing sixes and seven wing eights by talking about our last hobbit in the series, a Mr. Bilbo Baggins. Bilbo Baggins is a mix of the upbeat, adventurous 7 and the independent and somewhat rebellious spirit of the Type 8 Challenger. I'd say the sign nailed to his fence pretty much sums up that vibe. When we first meet Bilbo, he's thrown himself a massive birthday party where we see him entertaining children with his stories of past adventures, smoking some pipeweed with Ganja Gandalf, and slurring his speech after a few too many ales.
Today is my 111th birthday!
Which he wraps up by pulling the most epic Irish goodbye ever. Now, sevens have a major struggle with overindulgence, and eights struggle with lust for power and autonomy. Bilbo embodies both of these traits in his interactions with the ring. He keeps the ring because it helps him live longer and have the strength to do what he wants, which is why it's pretty hard for him to let it go.
My business isn't of yours when I do with my own
I
things.
think you've had that ring quite long enough.
Lastly, when sevens are feeling secure or healthy, they can look like Type 5s as they finally narrow their focus to one task at a time, which we see when Bilbo is in Rivendell and he finally finishes his life's work, There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Tale by Bilbo Baggins. All right, that's the last Hobbit in this Enneagram series. Time to move on to some other folks. Well, since we're about to enter Rivendell, it feels like a good time to talk about some of the elves, shall we? I thought there were several characters from Lord of the Rings that could actually fit the One Wing 9 description, but ultimately I landed on Galadriel, aka the Lady of the Woods. Ones with a 9 wing are known for their wisdom, spirituality, and a great deal of repressed anger.
In place of a dark lord, you would have a queen! Not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn! Treacherous as the sea!
And that's pretty much what happens when Type 1 goes to 4 in disintegration. Galadriel is known for her wisdom and foresight, which is on display during her interaction with Frodo as she foretells of the future and alludes to Boromir's desire to take the ring from Frodo, although she says that Frodo already knows of whom she speaks.
You know of whom I speak.
Yeah, that's what I just said. And this could mean that Frodo's got some one-ish characteristics as well. But back to Galadriel. The fact that she feels the need to test herself in order to see if she is indeed truly good and capable of withstanding the ring's temptation aligns with the Type 1's intense moral willpower.
I passed the test.
Plus, the whole dressed in flawless glowing white clothes thing is a pretty big turn on for the Type 1's taste in symbolic purity and perfection. All right, on to the next. All right, for the Enneagram 2 with a 3 wing, I chose Elrond. No, not that Elrond. Although Scientology is a good piece of fiction as well. 2-wing 3s are called the host because they serve people through their gifts, talents, resources, and yes, their homes. In the first Lord of the Rings movie, Elrond welcomes all types of folks to Rivendell: men, hobbits, dwarves, wizards, etc., in order to host the council that ultimately becomes the Fellowship of the Ring.
You shall be the Fellowship of the Ring.
Elrond also helps heal Frodo after he's stabbed by the Nazgul. While Elrond doesn't really portray that peppy, upbeat demeanor typical of 2-wing 3s, he does show a willingness to serve those in need like a 2 while leading his people like a 3. Also, unhealthy or stressed 2-wing 3s tend to lie to themselves about why they're helping people when they're really just kind of manipulating them to get what they want. In Return of the King, we find out that Elrond hid the truth about Arwen's future with Aragorn because he selfishly wanted her to come with him to the Undying Lands with her people.
I looked into your future and I saw death.
You saw there was a child. You saw my son.
That future is almost gone.
But it is not lost.
So, there you have it, the 2-wing 3. On to the next. Next up in the world of elves is Arwen, who I believe embodies some major traits of the 4-wing 3. Arwen is constantly looking forlorn and melancholy as she pines for her lover, who's always off running around Middle-earth, killing orcs and Uruk-hai and whatnot.
Fatality.
Fun fact, 4s typically feel more intense attraction to people that are not physically present. They live in their imagination and can stir up some pretty heavy emotions while doing so. You can also say that 4s are hopeless romantics, much like Arwen, who is willing to do some pretty dramatic stuff like sacrifice eternal life in order to live and die with the one she loves.
I would rather share one lifetime with you than face all the ages of this world alone.
Arwen also rebels against the vision of her father and the expectations of her community, aka the elves, in order to do her own thing and look sad doing it. Seriously, I don't think she smiles until like her last scene of the movie. Her polished demeanor and elite status amongst the elves is why I tacked on that 3-wing, as 4-wing 3s are called the aristocrat. Plus, she prides herself in being a faster rider than Aragorn, which is that competitiveness of the 3 as well. Alright, moving on to the next character that also happens to be an elf and fellow Type 4 individualist. Peter Jackson made the elves in Lord of the Rings these sort of moody, ethereal-looking beings that live in an elegant, almost monastic-looking community deep within the forest. While that may not align perfectly with the books, it does create the perfect backdrop for the 4-wing 5, aka the Bohemian, which I've matched up with our chief bowmaster, Legolas. 4-wing 5s feel deeply, but do not readily express their emotions directly. After Gandalf dies, Legolas can't even bear to translate the elvish songs of mourning to the rest of the group when Merry asks what they're saying.
I have not the heart to tell you. For me, the grief is still too near.
Ooh, so dramatic. And since 4s are generally stereotyped as the creative or artsy Enneagram type, I would argue that what Legolas does with his bow and arrow and fighting style in general is a creative expression, much like the martial arts. I mean, come on, the whole skateboarding down the stairs on a shield while sniping people with his bow is just the chef's kiss of fight moves. Lastly, a 4 teaming up with an 8 would pretty much be the epitome of opposites attract, and since I've got Legolas's bromantic partner pegged as an 8, it just made sense to make Legolas a 4. Okay, this one might have been more of a stretch, but what are you gonna do? I had to find someone for each type, so that's my final answer. On to the next. Well, now that I've got Mordor and Mount Doom in the background, let's talk about some of the villains Enneagram types. When it comes to Enneagram 5s with a 4-wing, they are some of the most isolated, intelligent, and crafty individuals that you'll meet, which pretty much sums up the Master Wizard himself, Saruman. 5-wing 4s are the most naturally withdrawn Enneagram type, and Saruman seems to spend all 3 movies holed up in his creepy black tower in Isengard. Sometimes you really have to give 5s a strong push to get outside. 5s also tend to be morally ambiguous because they're so pragmatic and so rooted in their sense of logic that they can pretty much justify whatever they want at a given time. Much like how Saruman rationalized being with Gandalf and the good guys at one point, and then went to the dark side once it felt irrational to go against Sauron and the powers of Mordor.
Against the power of Mordor, there can be no victory. We must join with Sauron.
Now, when 5s feel secure in themselves, they can actually behave like aggressive Type 8 challengers. And for Saruman, that looks a lot like chopping down an entire forest to breed an army of Uruk-hai. Lastly, 5s are called investigators because they just crave knowledge. And sometimes that's great and they become very innovative, and other times it leads them down some pretty dark rabbit holes. Saruman was likely corrupted by his use of the Palantir because he just couldn't help but study the dark magic of this mysterious and powerful crystal ball. All right, time for our next villain. I know it's not fun to have your Enneagram type connected to an unsavory character like Gollum, but for the 5-wing 6, it's a pretty good match. The 5's chief struggle is with this kind of isolating avarice. Deep down, 5s want to protect what they value the most, be it their resources, their ideas, their personal security, or what they find precious. And once they find that thing, they can become total reclusive minimalists. 5s are also known for their trust issues.
They will cheat you, hurt you, lie.
However, the 6-wing creates this fascinating inner tension for 5s because the natural pull of 5-ness is away from people, while the natural movement of 6 is towards people. You can see this exact push-pull inner dialogue between Gollum and Smeagol throughout all 3 films.
Master's my friend. You don't have any friends. Nobody likes you.
Fun fact, when Gollum is talking, his pupils get really narrow, but when Smeagol is talking, his pupils dilate. I think this is a great metaphor for the way that he lets more light in as Smeagol. And if you watched my full episode on Type 5s, some of my parting advice was to go towards the light, as 5s are often drawn towards dark or taboo areas of society, and sometimes that's just a harmless investigation, and other times it starts to make them drawn towards, let's say, some conspiracy theories or just mild cynicism. All right, sorry y'all got the villains, Type 5s. Just want to put a disclaimer on this that 5s can be wonderful, generous, compassionate people, just not in Middle-earth, apparently. All right, time to switch gears and talk about the men of Gondor. The Enneagram Type 3 is called the Achiever because they're defined by a need to appear successful in order to cope with a deep sense of shame around their identity. And if there's one character in Lord of the Rings that fits this description to a T, it's Faramir. Faramir is a loved and respected leader amongst his soldiers, but he's plagued with shame because he feels like a disappointment to his father, the douchebag steward of Gondor. Well, I guess he doesn't just feel that way. His father straight up says that he wishes Faramir was dead.
You wish now that our places had been exchanged. That I had died and Boromir had lived.
I wish that.
Like I said, douchebag. 3s are fueled by praise, and 2s just want to be loved, especially by their fathers.
If I should return, think better of me, Father.
So Faramir depicts the starved needs of the 3-wing 2 in his willingness to go on a suicide mission just to please his father. But he also depicts the strong leadership skills of a 3 in the fact that his men are willing to follow him even into certain death. I know this is a bit of a bleak one, but hey, he lives in the end and gets to marry one of the most underrated characters in the entire film, but more on her later. Okay, and sticking with the royal bloodline of Gondor, it's time for our next character. I had a heated debate with myself about whether Aragorn should be a 6-wing 5 or a 3-wing 4, but ultimately I landed on the 3-wing 4 because he's a mix of the 3's fantastic leadership skills and the 4's dark, brooding sense of self. 3s are known for being natural-born leaders, as they have an ability to inspire folks from all walks of life, like elves, dwarves, humans, hobbits, hell, even the ghosts follow this guy. Now, while 3s can look like natural-born leaders, they also shift gears a bit when they feel overwhelmed with shame and insecurity and can look like unhealthy 9s that try to avoid dealing with reality. Sort of like living as an anonymous emo ranger when you're actually the king of Gondor. Again, strong 4-wing vibes here. Lastly, when 3s feel healthy and secure in themselves, they take on the best traits of the Type 6 loyalist and stop hiding in dark corners thinking only of themselves, and instead become a selfless, committed member of a team willing to bravely fight for those in need.
The Fellowship has failed.
Not if we hold true to each other. We will not abandon Merry and Pippin to torment and death.
See what I mean?
Let us hunt some orc.
Yes! Alright, let's settle down a little bit and move on to the next character. I moved Boromir around a lot when I was first writing this series, mostly between 3 and 6, but I finally landed on the 6-wing 5 because of how he behaves in the very first scene he's in, which is the Council at Rivendell. This scene also gave birth to one of the most viral memes ever created, so I figured it was only right to use it as my main source of inspiration for this choice. Boromir is this complicated mix of confidence and fear, leadership and cowardice, loyalty and betrayal.
Give Gondor the weapon of the enemy. Let us use it against him.
Not with 10,000 men could you do this.
Give it to me. No! Give it to me.
This paradoxical nature is primarily caused by the Six's lifelong struggle with fear and doubt.
It is a strange fate that we should suffer so much fear and doubt over so small a thing.
Boromir is also very attached to the authority of his father, which is another common trait of the Type 6 loyalist.
My father, the steward of Gondor.
My father.
Father!
My father is a noble man.
Also, when 6s have a 5-wing, they struggle even more with doubt, worry, and cynicism.
It is long since we had any hope.
But on the bright side, 6-wing 5s are also called the Defender because they use their skills to protect weaker folks in need, like, let's say, some helpless hobbits. God, Sean Bean is so good at dying. All right, moving on. One of the most underrated Lord of the Rings characters, in my opinion, is actually a great depiction of the Enneagram 8-wing 9, and that's Eowyn. Eowyn is a total badass shield maiden of Rohan, and I'd say this one quote pretty much sums up her 8-ness.
The women of this country learned long ago. Those without swords can still die upon them. I fear neither death nor pain.
All 8s believe that the world is dangerous and that you must protect yourself at all times. They also have a natural longing for autonomy and heroic action. And when Aragorn asks Eowyn what she actually is afraid of, her response is,
a cage. To stay behind bars until use and old age accept them. And all chance of valor has gone beyond recall or desire.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say, oh, and I tacked on the 9-wing for Eowyn because she has more of an internal or reserved strength rather than that brash, overt aggression of the 8-wing 7, which I already assigned to a certain lovable dwarf. Okay, on to the next. Now, if you were going to pick a character from Lord of the Rings that fits the cliche idea of what a Type 8 challenger is, you'd probably land on this grouchy yet lovable dwarf, and that's Gimli, son of Gloin. The first time we meet Gimli, he's trying to destroy the ring with sheer brute force and then getting pretty racist with the elves.
I will be dead before I see the ring in the hands of an elf!
I believe he actually called them bad hombres in the deleted scenes. Anywho, 8s are defined by their need to fight against what they find to be evil, corrupt, or pretty much anything that threatens their independence. 8s feel energized when they face extreme adversity.
Let them come. One dwarf yet in Moria who still draws breath.
But when 8s feel secure or relaxed, they actually become big ol' softies that can resemble Type 2 helpers.
I thought I'd die fighting side by side with an elf.
What about side by side with a friend?
I could do that.
Oh, move over, Frodo and Sam. This is the real bromance. All right, that's enough on Gimli. Let's move on to the next character. It's time to talk about one of my personal favorite characters within the whole series, and that's Gandalf the White, aka the artist formerly known as Gandalf the Grey, or even
Gandalf Stormcrow.
I've got Gandalf as a 9-wing 8 because he's a perfect mix of strength and kindness. 9s at their core are filled with radical acceptance for all people. It's why they're so easy to like and why they're often able to hold divisive groups of people together. Like, let's say, a fellowship filled with men, hobbits, elves, and dwarves. Heck, even Saruman wanted Gandalf to join his side once he went all Breaking Bad. But that's where Gandalf shows his 8-wing again and goes blow for blow with Saruman in order to fight against evil and oppression. Fun fact, 9-wing 8s are nicknamed the referee because they don't mind raising their voice to keep people in line if they have to.
Bilbo Baggins! Do not take me for some conjurer of cheap tricks.
And and it's usually that shocking when the seemingly chill 9 lets that 8-wing loose. Remember, 9s are in the gut triad, and they suffer with a great deal of repressed anger. Furthermore, Gandalf demonstrates that trademark Type 9 non-judgmental perspective when discussing Gollum with Frodo.
It's a pity Bilbo didn't kill him when he had the chance.
Pity? It was pity that stayed Bilbo's hand. Do not be too eager to deal out death and judgment.
Lastly, 9s are often called lazy, but it's way more like a preference for unproductive activities. 9s love anything that can help them chill out a bit, like smoking that sticky icky with a friend and lighting off some fireworks.
Your love of the halfling's leaf has clearly slowed your mind.
Yeah, bro, that's the point. All right, sadly, we're almost done. Just one more character left to fill out our Enneagram roster. Back in the day when I first matched Marvel characters to each Enneagram type, I actually picked Groot as my Type 9 Peacemaker. So it's a bit ironic that I have another tree queued up for the Type 9 in Lord of the Rings. Treebeard is, albeit a funny but fitting depiction of the Enneagram 9-wing 1. Average or unhealthy 9s avoid conflict as much as they can. And when the hobbits first try to convince Treebeard to go to war, he says no.
This is not our war.
It's not until his peaceful environment is totally destroyed by seeing the forests of Isengard cut down that Treebeard finally decides to get involved. The One Wing makes 9s very principled and concerned with doing the right thing. And they'll lead the charge to make the world a better place as secure 9s take on many of the strengths of the Type 3 Achiever. However, that One Wing makes already slow-moving 9s even slower when it comes to taking action.
We never say anything unless it is worth taking a long time to say.
Well, on that note, it's taken a long time to find 18 characters to match to each of the Enneagram subtypes, so let's wrap this bad boy up. In making this video, I found it to be an interesting parallel that there are 9 members within the Fellowship of the Ring, 9 ring wraiths that make up the Nazgul hunting the ring, and 9 Enneagram types that are defined by the dark side of the ego and the bright side of their essence. Hashtag symbolic, am I right? Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it, and if you did, please consider hitting that like button or even subscribing to the channel. And if you want to take a real deep dive into the Enneagram types, be sure to check out my complete guides to each Enneagram type, linked somewhere here on the screen and in the description below. All right, much like Return of the King, this video should have ended 20 minutes ago, so I'll just say it's been a pleasure, and I hope to see you next time on You've Got a Type.